Hello, everyone. My name is Lena Tang. I'm a past president of the Asian Pacific American Women Lawyers Alliance. I'm here today with Julie A. Su, and we're very excited to have this programming today. Julie and Christine and I were just speaking prior to this event about how great it is that we have the Apala Trailblazer Speaker Series as a way to connect with lawyers and law students and to see each other face to face and obtain information and wisdom and knowledge from great individuals like Julie. So I'm going to start off with a brief introduction. Julie was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom as the California Labor Secretary in January 2019. She began her legal career with the El Monte garment workers case that redefined human trafficking and resulted in anti-sweatshop laws throughout the nation. She is a revolutionary icon for workers' rights and civil rights, and she is also one of my personal legal heroes. So I'll give some brief remarks to Julie.
Thank you so much, Lena. I'm so honored to be here, excited to be with Apala. And as we were saying beforehand, it's so nice to find ways to connect at a time where I think people feel very disconnected from each other. So grateful to be invited to speak to the sisterhood of Apala.
And we are so happy to have you. I think we have to start off with the El Monte garment workers case. And for those of you who don't know, in August 1995, 72 Thai workers were found held captive behind barbed wire and under armed guard in an apartment building in El Monte. The workers were forced to work around the clock for their freedom under threat of violence and harm. And Julie, with others, helped assist these victims to file for a federal lawsuit, which ended up leading to establishing legal precedent that the companies would be responsible for any workers' rights violations that occurred at the garment factory. And I mean, that was new at the time, because prior to that, they would always say that they would be subcontracting with the garment factories, and what was happening there, they weren't liable for. So it was a revolutionary case. And I, want to ask Julie, how did you become involved with the El Monte case?
Well, thank you so much, Lena. That's right. What happened in 1995 was the discovery of these workers who had been held for some as long as 7 years in this barbed wire enclosed apartment compound, sewing garments from the moment they woke up until late into the night, and then dragging their tired bodies upstairs to sleep on the floor, 8 or 10 to a bedroom. And so I think one of the really, really important points I want to make about the case is that it was such a early and powerful example to me of the strength and beauty of working in solidarity with people for something that we all believed in very passionately. So I got involved a couple of ways. One is that when I first got to what was then called the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, now Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Los Angeles, I was coming there to be a workers' rights attorney. And so I had reached out to the Labor Commissioner's office to learn about what they do, to talk about how we could create better access for workers, immigrant workers, and non-English speaking workers and workers of color and the like. So the day before the state and federal government went in to raid the apartment complex, they called our office. And the other way was that Stuart Quo, the then director of what's now Asian Americans Advancing Justice, knew someone who worked inside the Labor Commissioner's office. So these connections all, they all sort of, matter in ways that you will never expect. And so he got a call also, and they were looking for people who could speak Thai to go on a raid. We actually thought it was a regular, we'd seen lots of inspections. I'd actually gone with them on some inspections. We did not know just the horror that was going to be, exposed to the world on that raid. But that's how we learned learned about it, got involved. Then right after the raid, it was on the front page of the LA Times, 72 garment workers held against their will. And I remember Stuart and I saying, like, what happened to the workers? So we drove, I drove down to what was then INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the detention center, where they were all being held again in this barbed wire, now, federal detention center. And so along with a amazing group of mostly young Asian American activists, the Thai Community Development Center, the Koreatown Immigrant Workers Alliance, with CHIRLA, all these organizations who now have, have decades of advocacy and effective work under their belts. We were all quite new to the work, and we mobilized to demand their release. We sat in at INS and refused to leave till we were allowed to see the workers. And that began this journey where we were able to, fight for their freedom and help them to, adjust to basically, get some initial stability. And then we pulled together a legal team to file a lawsuit on their behalf.
Well, it's just truly amazing, I think, amount of coordination that was needed. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that this was pretty early in your legal career when this case landed on your lap, it sounds like. Do you want to speak a little bit about that in terms of how prepared you felt to take on a case of this magnitude?
So completely unprepared. You're absolutely right, Lena. So I was about a year out of law school, and again, the other organizers and activists I was working with were the same. We did not have a lot of experience, but we had a lot of passion. And actually, one thing that I've said, which I believe is true to this day, is that I think sometimes it was our lack of experience, our lack of really feeling hindered by the traditional bounds of how we think about legal advocacy that allowed us to fight the way we fought. So, when we got to the detention center, we were told that the law requires XYZ, right? The law requires that you know someone's alien number before you're allowed to see them. Well, it was impossible to know the workers' alien numbers because they'd been taken from this apartment complex and into detention and told they were going to be deported. We were told, all kinds of things that, that were not allowed. And we didn't really know whether that was true or not. And we thought that it was outrageous that you would take a group of workers who had been so horribly exploited and basically, keep them from any kind of the ability to talk to advocates. And so, we sat in, this is before cell phones, right? So we had to, when they refused to talk to us at INS Detention Center, we just took out, there were 2 pay phones, and we just, kept on calling inside and basically insisting that, that the workers be allowed to see us. And so I think sometimes it's that idea that you just have to figure things out, right? You have to make it work, that I think you get results that you might not otherwise get. But then there was also just as you said, it was a massive coordination effort, and there was so much help that we got, right? So there was the organizers and the activists, the nonprofit organizations. There was also this tremendous legal team that got put together. And so we had some of the most skilled litigators, the smartest, civil rights lawyers who came forward to say, we want to help you. So we put together a legal team that was made up of nonprofit legal organizations, as well as private law firms who came on pro bono, and it was incredible. So I was, never in it alone. I always felt like there were people willing to teach me and to guide me. And then, I think what's important here is that, I, along with our nonprofit organization, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, we really fought for our role in the case, because we knew that because we got to know the workers, right? The workers saw me as their advocate, saw us as their attorneys. It was really important for us to play a prominent role in the case too. So it was a lot of figuring things out as we went along, not being overly tied to the way things had always been done. It like instilled in me a lifetime of, I don't want to hear that this is the way it's always been done, so we have to keep doing it this way, right? But also knowing when to listen and learn from people who had just a whole history of skills and experience and impact.
Well, I think that's so empowering to hear. Especially, my biggest takeaway from what you just said is, just because that's the way we've always done it doesn't mean that we should continue. And I think it's so fascinating to me that what was the outcome? Like, was that the only, once you, like, it seemed like there were different challenges. And the first challenge was just getting access to
Yeah.
themselves after they were taken in by the INS.
Right.
After you were able to make contact, were there any other challenges that were faced, I think, in this case?
Yeah, it was so many things along the way. So obviously, just even then, right? Initially it was gaining the trust of the workers, right? The workers had been through so much, and they had been told before we ever saw them that it's better if you just go back to Thailand. And so, fighting for them to be able to stay in the country, fighting for them to, understand that they had a different option, right? I think one of the things that I would say, really drove all of us who worked on the case and got to know the workers and were so inspired and lifted by them was that they had been told their whole lives, basically, right? You should keep your head down and know your place. Right? There's only so much that you are entitled to, and seeing them through this journey that we had, right? Like starting at that place and then moving to a point where there was a real recognition of their own power, their own strength, their own voice, their own what they could and should demand better was really incredible. So that took a lot, and it was something that it wasn't just a journey for them, it was also a journey for me and all of us who worked with them. So it was gaining their trust. It was then talking about the legal system, right? Like I remember saying to them, oh, you have rights and you can fight for those rights, and there are labor laws that protect you. And that didn't make any sense in the in the early days. And so we did a whole bunch of things that you never get trained on in law school, right? Like we diagrammed what the garment industry looked like and what their role in connection to the companies who sold their goods, sold the clothes that they had made with their own hands. What was that connection? We took them to department stores where they could still see the garments they had sewn hanging on the racks. One of the first Thai words I learned was the Thai word for expensive, because they didn't know how much the clothes were actually being sold for. And when they contract that to what they made, it was really a moment of understanding, right, about their role in something that was much, much bigger. And so there was obviously the challenge of bringing a lawsuit that had never been brought before in federal court. So many things along the way. There were, in the end, 80 Thai workers, because some of the workers who had escaped before also came to the case. And then there was a big challenge because there was a group of Latino workers in a front shop for the Thai garment, the apartment complex that turned garment factory. And so we really we wanted to bring the Latino workers into the case as well. And there's all kinds of issues around that, right? There's the ethical issues around conflicts of interest, and there was just some logistical issues, right? The language barriers and the like. And so we worked really hard to build a sense of, not just common understanding the case, but real solidarity and community. It was, the case itself was a 4-year journey that all along the way, we didn't know what the outcome would be, right? We didn't know. I was asked so many times, Julia, are we going to win? Like, and there's so much that you don't know, right? Even as the lawyer in the case. And then, of course, there were the challenges of being an Asian American woman lawyer in a case like this. I just share one story of we showed up we had a big mediation once at a big law firm. And it was really important to me that whenever we had these big events in the case, that the workers themselves were involved and present. So I went and picked up a group of the workers, and we drove to this downtown high rise, and we took the elevator up, and obviously it was a very it was an environment that was unfamiliar really to the workers in particular. But to all of us, we get upstairs, and there's the ceiling to floor windows with a view of downtown LA. And so I was in my suit, I had my briefcase, and I walked up to the attorney who was waiting to greet us. And before I could open my mouth, the attorney leaned forward and said to me very slowly, to be sure I would understand, "Where's your lawyer?" right? So, we all showed up together. We were a group of, Asian, Latino people of color, and they assumed that I was one of the workers, which was, like one of those moments, I'm sure you've all had them too, where I wish I had had the perfect comeback at the time. I didn't at all. I was just stunned by that comment. So, that was just an example of, I think, many, many challenges along the way. And things that we now you can kind of learn from and laugh about and and critique, but they're also really serious examples of some of the barriers and misconceptions still in our profession.
That is so true. I think anyone who's watching this video now probably has some similar story of, outright discrimination or being misidentified as not the attorney, but as someone else, the court reporter, the staff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would love to just to delve, since that was brought up right now, what advice would you have to give attorneys who are experiencing that today? Because I know that you mentioned it as a historical story, but I think that it's something that still happens today, and individuals are still, I think, faced with that dilemma.
That's right. No, absolutely. And, there's something about that, right? Which is the power of, I think, it's the power of racism and sexism, frankly, that makes you feel small when it happens, even though, it's something that happened to you. It's something somebody else did. I don't know. I think for me, the first thing is just to always remember that you're not alone in it, right? It's what you just said, when you share these stories, you hear so many of our sisters in the law, right, have had them. And so remembering that you're not alone, I think is always really helpful, because again, one of the ways that hits so hard is feeling like you are the only person, in the room, or even, right, like in the profession. And that's not the case. So remembering that is, I think, just, really, really important. I guess, the other thing I would say is, oftentimes they also happen much more subtly than that, right? And that makes it hard, because then you think, am I being overly sensitive? Did that really happen? And I think, finding ways, or even practicing ways to call them out when they happen, right? Like I said, like to have that response is, I think, helpful too, right? It's just one of those things that knowing what we know, knowing the systems that we're in, having a few things that you practice in your head, right, that you can say, is, I think, helpful. It's not like there's going to be something right for every occasion, but it gives you the kind of strength and the preparation to address something when it does happen. And then I guess the other thing, which is not really so much what happens when it happens to you, but it is something that has certainly supported me throughout my career, is building a community around yourself, right, and feeling a part of a community where you can really kick back and share these things, right, and where people are really in solidarity with you about them. I mean, I do think there's change. I do think there's progress. But one thing we've definitely seen, especially in the last few years in this country, is that progress is never guaranteed, right? It's not this linear, inevitable forward march. There are tremendous forces of resistance and backlash and hatred. And, we've seen in all kinds of ways how those come up to the fore again so easily. So I think that sense of community and solidarity is just, it's so important. And, it's comforting and it's strengthening.
Absolutely. And I can't help but make a pitch for Apala in this moment. I think being surrounded by other APA women and being able to talk about it in a space where you don't have to do a lot of explanations of how you felt during that moment, it really is helpful. And to be reassured that, like you said, that you're not alone, and it's unacceptable. It's not in your mind. It was a moment where they assumed, I think, that you weren't the attorney. So that's really important. I think maybe just to cap off, I think, our discussion on El Monte case, looking back, would you have done anything differently in that case over those 4 years?
Oh gosh, I mean, yes, I think there's always there's always things that through experience especially with the benefit of time, looking back on things that you think, oh, if I'd known this, this would have been much easier, or I would have done it better. I do think one of the things I try to remind myself, and I think it's such an important lesson because I see this among, so many attorneys, and especially, again, women of color do this to ourselves a lot. It's this, like, I think it's important not to beat ourselves up about everything all the time. So, I think that's part, that's a lesson too, right? Is that the things we're gonna fight for are hard enough, right? The systems in place are, we're kind of moving to make things better in so many ways, in whatever the specific job is that we have. And so finding some room to be gentle with ourselves is, I think, helpful. I know I was, I was stressed a lot about whether I was doing enough, whether the impact was ever good enough. I questioned everything, every settlement. I questioned whether it was it was a good enough settlement. Each outcome, each meeting, I thought about whether I could have done it better. So I think there is a lot of that. The one thing that I feel like I learned there, though, that really helped me get through that was not feeling like those things were all up to me, right? That the idea of, empowering our clients and really working in collaboration with people so that you have shared ownership of a case, of a struggle, right? Even of a movement is I think, again, just so it's so important. It's the right way to work, right? None of us can do this alone. None of us should be doing this alone. And so, I think, the relationships that I built, and the relationships, with the workers, were just, it helped me to feel like, I wasn't making the decisions, on my own. But it's a lot to feel like people rely on you, right? Especially as an attorney, your expertise matters. How you present options matters. And so I think, I feel, I always felt like, oh, if I just said it this way, what would have happened? Could this have been done better? So yeah, there was a lot of that during that time, and since then too.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we have this legal precedent. So you did a very, very good job, I have to say. And it was very successful in so many ways, that legacy of that case and how it's changed workers' rights. I mean, that leads me to my next natural question, is that, do you feel that you've attained success at this point? Well, first off, I'd like to hear, how would you define and measure success? And then my second follow-up would be, do you feel that you've attained it now?
That's such a good question, Lena. I don't, and such a tough one. So I think, we grow up thinking that there is a like a destination, right? That where you will experience success. And so much of that is, for us, defined by education and then career. I would say what I have come to believe is that success is less a goal, it's more how you do the work, right? It's whatever the work is, how you go about it. It's, the like pushing yourself. And again, there's a balance, right? Pushing yourself and also being sort of, gentle enough to recognize that, these are hard times, what we're doing are hard things. But, pushing those around you, right? Making the people around you better, also being willing to be challenged by them, getting it wrong and still trying again. To me, those have become my measures of success more than an actual, job or title or achievement. And I think that's really important because it lets, it sort of forces us, I think, to experience the journey more than, just where we're going. And it allows us to rethink where we're going if it doesn't feel right. I mean, I would say I have been exceedingly fortunate in my life, in my career. But I'm doing a job that I never even knew existed. And that was true when I started too, right? So I say this often, I went to law school because I grew up the daughter of immigrants who translated for my parents, right? Such a common experience for so many of us, everything from, what happened in the store, what phone calls that came to the house, whatever letters that needed to be written. And as I grew older, I came to realize that law is really a language, and those who speak it get to decide who gets what in our society, who gets a whole set of rights that we consider, like that define so much of the benefits and enjoyments of life. Who gets to, work, who gets to marry, who gets to cross the border and who doesn't, who gets to march in the street and who doesn't, right? And so who gets to go to school and who doesn't. And so I went to law school to become a translator in the language of law for people who are marginalized, discriminated against, and exploited. And so I feel like I am using that skill every day, right? The skill that I had as a child, the privilege of speaking this language of law. And so I think, a lot of where I define success is how much I have kind of, used that skill to expand rights for people who don't speak the language, right? Who don't naturally have those opportunities or that ability to gain access to the law. So and a big part of that for me is also what my role in helping to build a sense of community. I think I define success as a role in a community and being a part of something larger than yourself. And so that's, again, something that you don't ever finish, right? There's no end point to that. But there are ways to see that there's been more connections for people who've been excluded. I think about translation now, not just as I want to make sure that every worker knows what their rights in the workplace are, but also it's translating the other way, right? Making sure that our laws tell the right stories. Our laws encompass the real life experiences of people who would otherwise be excluded. And so it's really, I think, more of a process than an end.
I mean, that's such an important point, that it's a work in progress, and it allows for further growth. And like you said, changing directions or pivoting when needed, assessing what your goals were when you started, and are those the same goals that you have today? Very, really important. I wonder, I don't think you've talked about yet about mentors that you've had during this journey. Would love to know, who would you name as the mentor that has had the most impact on your career, and why?
So I've had so many. When I say I've been exceedingly fortunate, I've had so many, and that's why it's so important to me to try to be, available and present, really, for others who are coming up. I would say, first, I was, again, my first job at a law school was working at what is now Asian Americans Advancing Justice. And, one of the things when you ask about El Monte too, Lena, I think it's so important. It was such an example of how important it is to have organizations in our community that are dedicated to social justice, civil rights, and advocacy. And so those organizations just play such a key role, right? Because you can't always anticipate what the fights are going to be, but to have institutions in place that are there to fight them is so important. And so, me being able to get a job at a law school, to pursue my passions, to be a civil rights attorney, was because of that organization. And so Stuart Quo, who was the founder and longtime executive director, was one of my very first mentors, and somebody who really taught me a lot about being generous in with experience, with time, but also with trust. Right? Giving people a chance to try things that, again, you may not know that it's the right thing to do. You may not know it's going to work, but I'm willing to put faith in someone to try something and to give people room to go. Right? That's something I try to bring to my work now. Right? Is to give people a chance to really to try things. So, I would say him. And then of course, at the time we were also really working to start a national Asian American civil rights organization. And so Karen Narasaki, who was the director there, became a mentor and remains a mentor and friend, and someone I just respect tremendously. I don't even think I had a full appreciation for all that she struggled with, right? As an Asian American woman navigating the world of DC in an organization that was very young and in a community that people really didn't have a very, very good understanding of. And so many of us are beneficiaries of the work that she did and the voice that she raised, and the ability to bring issues involving Asian Americans, everything from anti-Asian violence to voting rights, right, to language access in ways that were really revolutionary at the time. And she was also just somebody who was so generous with time and support. And then I think obviously you're going to find mentors who support you in different ways for different things, right? So I was also, again, really lucky. I became the litigation director, and we were not an organization that had done a lot of litigation. So I really sought out help and support from experienced attorneys who were litigators. And, and again, it was all, people like Carol Sobel and Connie Rice and Mark Rosenbaum and, people who've been civil rights litigators for a long time, who kind of, took me under their wing and were willing to answer every ridiculous question I had or listen to me, practice for oral argument. And the like. And then I think there are peers that become your mentors too, right? People that you meet and you work with. I'm sure you're nodding. I'm sure a lot of people, hear this too. You get to know someone, you work with them, and you find that they have so much to teach you also. And so, good friends like Kimberly West Falcon. I mean, so many, all of the incredible, especially Asian women that I worked alongside all these decades have been not just friends and peers, but also mentors. And then I think there are also people who just really embody such goodness. Like they teach you about the profession, but they also teach you how to live, like how to live with integrity, how to speak, with an authentic voice. And so, like Mia Yamamoto is just someone, I think she's a mentor to so many people. So I'm not going to be original here in saying this, but she's just somebody who from my very earliest days was somebody who just showed me that, what it meant to, live in your job with deep compassion and passion and skill, and also live in the world as somebody who's generous and kind and humble. So I've always considered her a longtime mentor and friend.
I would agree with you. I am in the, me and so many other lawyers that I know are in the Mia Yamamoto fan club. I met her when I was a 1L, and she's been a mentor friend since. As with you, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but we were talking before the call that I first met you about 6 years ago at the 20th anniversary of the El Monte celebration for the workers. So you both are definitely my heroes and mentors, but I agree, Mia is one of the best. I hope you're listening, Mia, to hear that. All this praise coming at you. I wonder, I think this is a question that we've received from a few individuals, is that, do you have any advice for AAPI women in the legal profession who are considering a pathway to public service or public interest, given your long history and career there?
So my most direct advice is to do it, to definitely do it. I think there's all kinds of, and I felt these myself, and I know that I've talked to so many young lawyers over the years who are just nervous about what it would mean to do it, right? It's in many ways a less certain path, right? Because there isn't like kind of one trajectory. It's not like this many years and cases and clients to partner, right? It's not like this many, you develop these things and then you get to a certain point. But I always say that I think the very best way to learn how to be a lawyer is to start in public service, is to start in a nonprofit public interest organization. You are always going to be out-resourced, outgunned, outmanned. The other side is always going to have more time, more money, better technology, more resources than you. But that lesson is just, it teaches you how to not just be a lawyer, right? Not just, outwork the other side, research harder, think more creatively, find more solutions. But I think it gives you a resilience that is so that just is so essential in our profession, in the work. And to the theme of kind of community and the people you're around, you get to work with people who all got there because they have a passion for and a vision for what the world should look like. I should say, of all the mentors that I mentioned, and one of the reasons I wanted to go to Asian Americans Advancing Justice as a baby lawyer myself was that the vision for civil rights was very much rooted in Asian Americans and the diversity of Asian America, and also in our struggle for civil rights. Our advancement is intricately tied to the advancement of every other community of color, of LGBTQ, right? And it was really important to have that holistic, broad view of justice, that we should fight for Asian American workers, even if it meant sometimes we were advocating, for change among Asian American employers, right? It was really important for us to advocate for LGBTQ rights and African American, Latino, civil rights, even if it meant that Asian Americans had a privileged position relative, in that particular struggle. And so I think those kinds of things that you learn from being in a nonprofit organization, they're just, it's really so valuable. The other thing I think I'll just say for anybody who's starting out or even looking to get into public interest is that feeling of doubt, like, am I ready for it? Can I actually do it? No one is ever really ready. I mean, or let me say, people who say they're ready are not, some people think they're ready. And there's a lot of those of us who always question whether we are. No one is ever really ready. So, people ask me when I left civil rights work to go into government, I struggle with that. I mean, again, the people who helped me think it through and were so invaluable in saying, here's what you can do there. Here's the impact you can make. Here's why it'd be really important also for the Asian American community, right? To have the first Asian American, whatever it is, right? Like labor commissioner, the first Asian American woman as the California labor secretary. Though, you're not going to feel like you're ready, and that's okay, right? That a lot of being a lawyer, you probably saw this in law school. I felt this in law school is, you don't realize that you were ready until you do something, right? Until you try something. And so not being held back by that idea is, I think, really important. And I'm sorry, I'll say one last thing, which is that you don't have to be a martyr, right? I think sometimes people think of public interest as you have to give up everything to do it, right? Like your life becomes your work. And yes, of course, the work is really hard. And, I do think that in many ways, work became my life, but, it's people would always say, you took such a big sacrifice. I've never thought of it as a sacrifice. To do something you love, to do it with people that you love, I don't know what could be better than that. And so it's true, you won't make as much money, right? You may not drive a certain kind of car, you may not live in a certain community, but for me, those actually turned out to be really great gifts. And when I had kids, I really wanted to teach them, right, the same things that my parents had taught me, right? Like, a sense of gratitude and, frugality, right? Things that I think, of real appreciation. And I think, there's a connection, like when you do this kind of work that you can really live it out at home. And it became a really valuable way to teach my daughters about appreciating their lives and becoming their own kind of warriors for a more just world.
Oh, I love it. There's so many, I think, real nuggets of wisdom there for everyone who's considering public service or public interest. I hope everyone that goes out there and does it. I'm sold. So, well, I think you touched a little bit about this self-doubt and in terms of, your experience with it when early on in the case, but, and you've had a very full career with different hats. You were the impact litigation director at APOC, then you were the California Labor Commissioner and now to California Labor Secretary. So I would like to know, when you were switching to another career, when you faced self-doubt at those moments, what else would you recommend, I think, to attorneys who are experiencing that? And I think you have talked about, I think, treating yourself gently and or maybe giving more self-love, which is good. But any other recommendations for those who might be feeling that they're, imposter syndrome or that they're not qualified,
Ugh,
not ready?
yeah, I think that's, so I mean, again, I think part of it is, um, the same way that we, advocate for issues and communities and clients that we care about. I do think there's a certain amount of advocacy that has to occur, um, to to move away from these deep feelings of, insecurity, or like you called it, self-doubt, right? Some of it is, actually quite irrational, right? Like it's, oftentimes you will be the most experienced person in the room. You know more about an issue than anybody else. You've been the one who's lived it, even, right? Experienced it, researched it, written about whatever it is. And so I think really, advocating for ourselves in that, in those moments is, I think, really important to do, right? And again, being in a community with people who will also do that advocacy for you, right? I cannot count the number of times people have lifted me up in that way, or even just say, like, we got you, and I think that's, that is an exercise in itself, right? It's a sort of a form of, I don't even know, like, I don't know, like mental health, and really a form of advocacy, right? Not something you learn in law school, not something you even learn in most sort of like professional training, but I do think it's a really important part of, reminding ourselves of what we have to give, why we should be at the table, and pushing some of those thoughts, out of the forefront, and recognizing it as an exercise, as a skill, right? It's a skill to be able to do that. When I say, we advocate in so many ways, and measure our accomplishments in that, I think also our ability to really see ourselves, correctly, and take, step into moments where we should, I just think, it's important for us to think of that as a skill for us to also develop. I guess I would say that way. And then, I think the other thing is also, though, to actually be honest with ourselves about mistakes or shortcomings and things that we don't do well, right? I mean, there's a little bit of an occupational hazard, I think, among attorneys, right? And when you're around it too much, I think that also becomes, problematic, right? Where people don't feel comfortable, don't want to acknowledge, how much they have to learn. Just even say, like, I don't know, right? Sometimes people think that that's, somehow a shortcoming. I think really being able to embrace that idea. There are things that we don't know. There's things that we have to learn. There's things that we, tried and didn't do as well as we could have done them. I think that's really important too. And I certainly, when you ask, like, have these things ever happened to me? They happen to me now, like that, in my current job. I feel like there's so much that I'm doing that I was not, prepared to do, right? Like, stepping into this work and advising the governor on labor policy, and really thinking about, how do we keep the workforce safe? How do we ensure that, that workers are treated, right, every day that they go to work, and go home with everything that they earned in their pockets? How do we now, put millions of Californians back to work, and how do we rebuild an economy, right, that we need to make so much better than it was even before we entered this, this really tremendously difficult last year? There's lots of challenges in that, and so I think being willing to acknowledge, right, that there's things that we don't know, and making that okay, that we can improve, we can, support each other. We can try things and we don't know if they're going to work. I think those are really, really important, and it's a part of our profession that I wish overall was, there was more openness to, but I think as we, navigate and make our own way in the profession, I think that's an important part of being a lawyer who's true to who we are, and how we experience the world.
I mean, it is very true. I think like you hit the nail right on the head, that there's like a taboo to admit that you don't know the answer to that, and that you need a moment to research. It's not that you can't get the answer,
Yeah.
you just don't know it now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is very, like you said, a skill that I think to advocate for yourself, I think it's a great way to put it. And it's a skill that we need to develop and have as attorneys as well. I mean, as individuals and human beings, but that's
Yeah.
really important. And I hope that helps out any law students or young attorneys on the video. I had one question I know that an audience member had asked was, and you mentioned a little bit that you had some reservations or hesitation when you were deciding to leave as the impact litigation director to the California Labor Commissioner. And so I think the question I would ask is, what were you thinking and what were you debating at that time? And how was the role different going from advocacy, I think, in litigation to government?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So I will say I loved my job. I think that, I don't think any job you love every single part of it, but I loved working at Asian Americans Advancing Justice. I love the people. My closest friends are people I met during that time now to this day. Obviously the relationships that I built with workers, including the workers that you started out with, Lena. You said, you mentioned we met at a anniversary celebration. Before COVID, we were doing annual reunions, and they became reunions, not just of kind of attorneys and clients, but of family, right? Of this growing family of civil rights advocates and attorneys and the like, as well as the growing family that the workers, the families that they were growing. And so, I think that there's just a tremendous, joy to be found in the work, even when things are really hard. And I think it's important to, be conscious of that and to embrace that. But I struggled to leave that, right? But what happened was, back in 2011, when Governor Brown came in, he was elected governor. This is again a story about community. So Lilia Garcia Brower, who is a fierce and amazing advocate, she contacted me to say, "Hey, do you want to be the labor commissioner?" And I was like, "No, I don't want to be a labor commissioner." So, and then Angie Wei, who is also like another, really powerful Asian woman sister, she was then at the California Labor Federation. She then also said, too, "You should be the labor commissioner." So, there was some level of, Julie, you've been doing this advocacy on the outside of government for a long time to try to just like make government function better for people who are excluded and people who rely on government but don't see themselves in government. And so I think for me it was this struggle, partly of could I do the job, and partly of I felt like it was an opportunity I couldn't not take. I couldn't not do, the argument was, if you know what the change is needed, why wouldn't you come inside and try to make those things happen? And so I struggled with that, and ultimately, of course, decided to do it. I'll say, and now actually there's a nice footnote to that, which is Lilia Garcia Brower is currently our labor commissioner. So I did that work for 8 years, and then Governor Newsom appointed me to be California Labor Secretary, and in helping him to bring, to bring a team to the table that I thought, could really be what workers and employers in California deserved. Lilia was willing to step up to do that. So, some of it is like the opportunities come up because, people push you and people say you can do it when you don't know you can. But I think there's also something powerful about representation. And, we're in a world, like, I talked about the backlash, right? We're in a world where I think for Asian American women, we need to create opportunities. And when we have them, there is some, idea that we, that we ought to step into them. So I struggled with all of those things. I'll just tell one little story though there's so many about like why us, once we're there, it kind of, opens up doors for community, for our community as a whole. But I have a funny story to share, which is, for both of my positions at the state, I had to be confirmed by the Senate. And my first time around, I didn't know what I was doing at all, but I had to go meet with the senators on the Rules Committee. So I flew up to Sacramento and went to meet with them in their offices. And for one of them, there was a senior Republican senator who, when I walked into his office, again, I didn't know what I was doing, so I was very nervous. And I walked in, he said, "Sit down." And I sat down, and he had some papers in his hands. And he said, "I'm going to read you something, and I want you to tell me what you think about it." And he read, "Julie Su has been a fierce labor lawyer her entire career. This appointment will let her take her ass kicking to a whole new level." And so I had that same reaction. I laughed at that. I thought like we were gonna, like share a moment of solidarity. And he put the paper down and he was like, "So I just want to know, if you get this job, are you going to kick ass or be fair?" And so his question was really aimed at or encouraging me to discredit all the work I had done as an advocate, right? That somehow there was like you couldn't do both, I suppose, or, but really make me say, yeah, all this advocacy I had done, there's a place and time for that, but this is really different. And of course there are differences between being inside government, being an advocate. That's true. And, there's a lot of nuance and complexity and, and it's important to be sensitive to those things. But I just, I feel like the idea that, somehow we have to leave who we are behind when we step into different jobs is something I just, I think it's really important to push back on, right? And that the experiences that we have that, I had as a translator or, as, knowing, the world of low-wage workers and immigrant workers and the struggles that they face, and of having been an advocate are actually things that, that were assets to me stepping into the position rather than something that I shouldn't do. So the final point to that was really neat was, so I left that office, and before I even walked out of the Capitol, I got a call from the governor's office saying, "What did you say? This senator is going to vote against you." And I was like, I don't know, but he read this to me. And, you should know that that he was reading was from Angry Asian Man, a blog to Angry Asian Man, which we know what that is, but it gave me some amount of pleasure to now imagine like all these people who would not have otherwise been reading it, actually reading Angry Asian Man. And so, there's just, again, ways that like doors get open because of who we are and what we're willing to step through, that I think, we're all a part of doing that. And it's just, been an amazing journey and privilege to be part of that, but also like, I want to say, right, that we're never alone in doing those kinds of things. And when we step through, we open it up for, for worlds, our worlds to be expanded, and for, people to learn more about who we are and what we've done. I think that's really exciting and powerful.
Absolutely. I can imagine the look on his face when you responded to him, that you hope that you would be doing both. I'm going to be fair, but also ass kicking while I'm there. So I'm so glad that you have been in these positions in government, and like you said, working internally. I think in terms of promoting some of the work working in tandem with the community work that's going on outside, right? And making those changes reflected in government and in law.
Mm-hmm.
I think my last question to you will be, what have you found to be the most challenging part of getting to where you are now?
Oh, gosh. So I think that, so it's a great question. It's also so connected to this conversation in terms of, I think one of the things that's hard, I think we all go through this, right, is one, it's wondering, whether the decisions that we're making are the right ones for us and, for the people we love, but also, the doubt about whether what you left behind, like what you didn't choose to do, whether there's going to be regrets or questions about that. So I think that, I mean, I don't have a solution to that. I do think sometimes it's important just to acknowledge things, right? Acknowledge that's there. I think there's always that kind of like, if I do this, then, what about all these other things that I could have done? And doesn't mean I never get to go back to doing them. So I think that's one thing that I've struggled with, and I guess the other, right, which is just really real, and we've certainly seen in the last year how difficult and this is for women, right, especially because we still live in a world where a lot of the burdens of the world, but of work, work fall disproportionate on women. Is, I think, the challenge of just where do you put your time, right? Where do you put your time, both to make the greatest impact, but also to be true to to obligations and commitments and priorities that you have. So I'm a mom. I've got two now almost grown kids. And I think, I mentioned earlier how it's been extraordinary to try to align, my work world and their world. It's not just in the issues and the awareness that they've had, but it's also in the people that have been brought to their lives, right? Like they've grown up with like a whole world of aunties and uncles of people, right, who are from this incredible world that includes workers and advocates, that's been incredible for them. But I also think there's did I have enough time to spend to be the kind of mom I wanted to be the attorney that I needed to be for California, what I had committed to being. And I think that is just very, very real. And it's harder for low income women, right, who don't have the option to work from home, who can't afford childcare. They're the same workers that I worked with for years, who would bring their children to these long meetings that we were having, about their case, because there was no other option, right? And they would bring them, on the bus, in the rain, whatever it was. I think, just that's a real struggle across the board. And it's a struggle no matter, I think, what, in pretty much whatever job you're in. It's really real and it's hard. And I want to, I think it's not something that we talk about a lot. But I would say, that challenge of whether the choices you make, whether what you're giving up is, are the right choices. And then, where you put your time, is right when there's a finite amount of it, is I think things that I continue to struggle with.
I love that you brought up the fact of the fact that there are, especially during COVID, there's been a lot more work thrust upon, I think, mothers and during this time. And how I know I said it was my last question. I lied. My follow-up is, do you have any words of encouragement or advice to attorneys who are also are balancing, I think, their family and balancing, I think, spending time with their children and trying to, I think, impart a certain kind of advice and education to them?
I mean, so difficult now, right? They're really, I don't even know, when we look at the, the numbers of women who have left the workforce, right? Because again, it was just an untenable situation to both work and mother. When you look at it, there's this crazy, it's improbably, I guess I would say, COVID has affected women both in terms of the large number of women who've lost their jobs, right? Jobs in hospitality, for example, right? Hospitality, retail, and those who have been essential workers on the front lines, taking the greatest risks, who still have to go to work, right? Healthcare and other kind of caregivers. And I feel like the deep inequities in our society that predated COVID have been, absolutely, just been made worse over the last year. So that's not an encouraging thing to say. That's just really acknowledging it has been, incredibly challenging. We saw it in the care world, right? We really saw this in terms of, caregivers were so hard hit in terms of just getting COVID, right? And a lot of that was because the work is oftentimes it's low pay, it's long hours. These are mostly women and women of color who do the work and then have to work at multiple facilities because they don't have one job, that's enough to support themselves and their families. And so it's been just, I think those are I'll put them as, those are the challenges that those of us in positions of advocacy and of policymaking really, we now have opportunities, I guess I would say, to address them and to make those jobs that are going to be growth jobs, right? We're going to need more care, from childcare to elder care in the economy no matter what. And so, how do we pay attention to making those jobs really good jobs, so that we not only have good quality care, but we are also, rebuilding an economy on people who can support themselves and really build a quality life through quality jobs. So I think there's maybe the thing to say is, what opportunities are created by just so much being exposed in terms of what women have to do, both at work and at home. And I think there are opportunities now, especially, right, with, new leadership at the federal level to really think about that, to think about it creatively and to push for things to be better.
Well, I think that's a great note to leave on. And I really want to thank Julie and Christine for joining us. For Christine for joining, for Julie for joining us and spending this hour with us. We'll have a next session with Mia Yamamoto as a conversation piece on March 22nd at 12:30. So keep a lookout on that. But thank you so much, Julie, for your time.
Thank you so much, Lena. Thank you for having me. It was awesome.
Take care.